welcome to the Discipline of Greatness, the podcast where we break down the habits, the mindset, and the unseen work behind some of the greatest athletes and competitors of all time. I'm your host, Doug, and every episode here is built around one simple belief. Greatness isn't built in moments, it's built in discipline. I have one small favor to ask before we get started here, everybody. If you could please hit the follow button on the show's channel so you don't miss future episodes. It's the easiest way to support the podcast, and it helps the show reach more people who care about growth, competition, and what it really takes to be great. And today's episode is a perfect example of that. Because this story isn't just about winning races. It's about rebuilding yourself when your body, your confidence, and the world around you all tell you it might be over. Today we're talking about none other than American Olympic great Lindsey Vonn, one of the most dominant Alpine skiers of all time, and maybe the greatest example of what it looks like to choose discipline again and again when quitting would be easier. You know what I've always found interesting about Lindsey Vonn? When people talk about her, they usually start with speed. They talk about medals, they talk about dominance, they talk about how fast she was going downhill, how fearless she looked, and how aggressive her skiing was. But if you really zoom out, Lindsey Vonn's story isn't actually about speed. It's about how many times she had to start over and still decided to keep going. Because she didn't just rebuild greatness once. She built it, lost it, rebuilt it, and then rebuilt it again until rebuilding became a part of who she was. And that's why our story fits perfectly here. This isn't a skiing episode. It's a discipline of greatness episode. Lindsey Vonn was born Lindsey Carolyn Kildo in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1984. Skiing wasn't something she casually discovered later in life. It was built into her environment from the very beginning. Her dad, Alan Lee Kildo, was a serious ski racer himself, a national junior champion whose own career ended early at the age of 18 because of a knee injury. And that detail matters. Because Lindsey didn't grow up around skiing as a hobby. She grew up around it as something that had unfinished business attached to it. And according to Eric Saylor, who ran the development program at the local ski hill in Burnsville, Minnesota, where Lindsey Vonn grew up, that ski hill was called Buck Hill, her father pushed her very hard. Her mom, Linda, was an attorney, and Lindsey has talked openly about how structured her household was. Expectations were clear, schedules mattered, discipline was not optional. She grew up in a big family with 5 kids, which meant you had to be tough early. Attention was shared, competition was normal, and you learned how to stand your ground real early. She learned to ski at just 2 years old, helped in part by her grandfather, Don Kildo, and her early training took place, as mentioned earlier, at Buck Hill in Minnesota, which is one of the most important details in her entire story. Buck Hill isn't glamorous. It's short, it's icy, and it exposes mistakes immediately. There's nowhere to hide. If your technique is sloppy, you feel it right away. So Lindsey learned early that skiing wasn't just about style. It was about repetition, precision, and doing things right when no one was watching. She's also been honest about the guilt she felt knowing her entire family rearranged their lives around her skiing. Long drives, missed events, living out of cars, growing up faster than most kids did. That pressure breaks some people. For Lindsey, it hardened her. As a kid, Lindsey wasn't doing casual ski days. She was doing structured sessions, early mornings, cold starts, the same drills over and over until they became automatic. She learned how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Standing at the top of a hill when it's freezing, driving hours for a short training window, doing homework in the car, missing normal kid stuff. None of it felt heroic at the time. It just became normal. And that matters because by the time she was a teenager, discipline wasn't something she had to summon. It was already a part of her identity. At 9 years old, Vonn got a chance to meet her hero and role model, Peekaboo Street, for for the first time. Street would later become Von's mentor and remembers the first time she saw Vonn ski at an event in 1999. She was quoted as saying, "The faster she went, the bigger the smile she got on her face. You can't teach somebody to fall in love with the fall line like that, and that little girl loved the fall line." In the late 1990s, Vonn and her family made the move to Vail, Colorado, where Lindsey would train. So she had, at this point, been commuting back and forth from Minnesota to Vail, and the family just decided it just made more sense to make the move. So off they went. I think it was in 1999 they made the move. Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's when it was. She attended University of Missouri High School, which had an online program for distance and independent study, so she can continue to get her education while training as much as possible. While doing so, she also learned to speak German and can do so fluently. Probably helpful on the European circuit, I would imagine. Lindsey made her World Cup debut on November 18th of 2000 in Park City, Utah, at just 16 years old. Now, she didn't just arrive and dominate. She arrived and had to learn how to survive. Downhill skiing at that level is overwhelming. New mountains, new snow, veteran racers who have seen everything. One mistake can end a session. So her discipline shifted. Instead of just grinding physically, she became a student of the sport. She obsessed over course inspections. She paid attention to snow texture and light changes. She watched video constantly. She studied how veteran racers manage risk. She wasn't just skiing. She was learning how to think like an elite skier. This is where her discipline became intellectual. By her mid-20s, Lindsey Vonn entered her prime, and this is where her discipline separated her from almost everyone. Her training became incredibly intentional. She wasn't just trying to get stronger, she was trying to get stronger in the exact ways downhill skiing demanded. She trained her legs to absorb massive forces at speed. She trained her core to stay stable through compression. She worked relentlessly on balance so she could recover from mistakes at 80 miles an hour. Race day wasn't emotional for her. It was all about execution. And that's how she built one of the greatest resumes in Alpine skiing history. Her 83 World Cup wins are only second to current record holder and fellow U.S. Olympian Michaela Schifrin. 4 overall World Cup titles, 3 of which came consecutively in 2008, 2009, and 2010, with the fourth coming a couple of years later in 2012. 8 World Cup downhill season titles, 5 Super G season titles, and she has the 3rd highest super ranking of all skiers, men or women. The super ranking is a point system calculated using points from 3 categories: Olympic Games, World Championships, and the World Cup. So for the World Cup, overall titles, discipline titles, and individual top 10 results help determine that. So the discipline points are taken from downhill, Super G, giant slalom, and combined. Combined is it's 1 run of downhill and 2 runs of slalom, although there are a few different iterations of that, but with the winner being the fastest aggregate time across 3 runs, so total time of each run added together. Vonn is one of 6 women to have won World Cup races in all 5 disciplines of alpine skiing. In 2011, she received the Laureus World Sportswoman of the Year Award and also the United States Olympic Committee Sportswoman of the Year. Now, she had a ton of wins, and a lot of those wins came in one particular place, Lake Louise. Lake Louise became Lindsey Vonn's mountain. She won there 18 times, and that wasn't luck. Lake Louise is fast, icy, and unforgiving. It rewards commitment and punishes hesitation. Lindsey trusted her preparation there more than anywhere else. She knew the lines, she knew where she could push, she knew where discipline mattered more than aggression. Those weren't just wins. They were statements. She's one badass bitch. In 2002, at the age of 17, Lindsey Vonn made her Olympic debut in Salt Lake City, racing and participating in both the slalom and the combined. With her best result coming, the 6th place finish in the combined. Lindsey Vonn won 3 Olympic medals. Gold in the downhill at the 2010 Vancouver Olympics, bronze in the Super G at those same games in Vancouver, and another bronze in the downhill at the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics. However, during the 2006 Winter Olympics in Italy, Vonn took a nasty spill during her second practice run and had to be airlifted to Turin and was in the hospital overnight. However, 2 days later, with a bruised hip and strong pain, she returned to compete and finish in 8th place. This dedication and commitment earned her the U.S. Olympic Spirit Award. That is an award voted on by American fans, USA athletes, former U.S. Olympians, and members of the media, and it is awarded to the athlete that best represents the Olympic spirit. And in this particular case, that was definitely Lindsey Vonn. At the 2010 Olympics, Lindsey crashed hard in training just days before the downhill. Her shin was badly bruised and swollen, she could barely walk, and she had people questioning whether she should even compete. She couldn't train the way she wanted to, so she trusted her preparation instead of feeling. She raced anyway, and on February 17th, in her first event, she beat out longtime U.S. rival Julia Mancuso to win the gold medal by 56/10 of a second, and in doing so, she became the first American woman to win Olympic gold in the downhill event. Now, it wasn't a perfect performance, but it absolutely was a controlled one. Vonn also added a bronze medal in the Super G event, finishing 3rd behind Austrian Andrea Fischbacher, who won gold, and Slovenian Tina Mays, who took the silver. Now, 2013 was a trying year for sure. 2013, this is the moment where Lindsey Vonn's career permanently changes shape. The 2013 World Championships in Schladming, Austria. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but you can let me know in the comments if you know how to pronounce it properly. Vonn had a disastrous crash and was once again airlifted to a nearby hospital. There she learns that she has a torn ACL, a torn MCL, and a fractured tibial plateau, all in the same knee. That combination matters. An ACL tear is devastating on its own. Add an MCL tear and you've lost all stability. Add a tibial plateau fracture and now the bone itself, the surface that absorbs the impact, is compromised. This wasn't just an injury, this was structural failure. For most athletes, what is wrong with me today? For most athletes, this is the point where doctors start talking about quality of life instead of podiums. And Lindsey knew that. She said this was the first time she truly questioned whether her body could still do what her mind wanted it to do. Despite these internal questions, she still said she would be ready for the 2014 Winter Olympics the following year in Sochi, Russia. The early rehab was brutal. Not dramatic, but very, very humbling. The first 6 to 8 weeks were nothing but swelling control and range of motion. No strength, no power, just bending and straightening a knee that didn't feel like her own. She talked about how hard it was to go from being one of the strongest athletes in the world to celebrating being able to walk without pain. That is discipline when no one is watching. All those hours rehabbing, grinding, putting in the work just to maybe come back. I'm telling you, she was a badass. But as her rehab progressed into months 2, 3, 4, the work became mentally exhausting. Quad activation became a daily battle. The muscle simply wouldn't fire the way it used to. Any balance work exposed how unstable everything felt. Single leg movements that one felt automatic suddenly required full concentration. She's described this phase as humbling, not because it hurt, but because it reminded her how fragile elite performance really is. By months 4, 5, and 6, she started rebuilding power carefully. Bike sessions replaced impact, pool workouts became essential, allowing her to move explosively without stressing the joint. Controlled plyometrics were introduced slowly, but the fear wasn't pain. The fear was trust. Trust in her knee, trust in the surgery, everything. When she returned to snow around 6 to 9 month mark, the hardest part was the speed. It was committing to a line without hesitation. Her body remembered the crash even when her mind wanted to attack. She leaned heavily on visualization, replaying runs in her head, trusting preparation instead of instinct. Unfortunately, due to continued issues with her knee, including partially tearing her right ACL after a crash during training in November of 2013, and then re-injuring it again while skiing in France on December 21st of 2013, she had to announce that she would no longer be able to compete in the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. Right about here is what separates Lindsey from almost everyone else. She kept pushing. She kept rehabbing. She kept grinding. And she didn't come back just to see if she could still ski. She came back to win. On December 6th, 2014, in only her second race back, she climbed her way to the top of the podium and won the Women's World Cup downhill race in where else? Lake Louise, Alberta. Downhill skiing doesn't reward caution. If you've seen it on the Olympics or anywhere else, you know they be flying. You gotta give her. To win, you have to fully commit, which means trusting a knee that has every reason not to be trusted. Her post-2013 wins weren't flashy. They were controlled, calculated, and clean. These victories didn't just silence doubt from the outside world. They rebuilt belief on the inside. As Lindsey continued winning, another pressure quietly built. She was chasing Ingmar Stenmark's all-time World Cup Crystal Globe wins record of 19. Every start gate carried history. Every race came with expectations. Instead of shrinking, shying away, falling under the pressure, she leaned into it. She said this phase required emotional discipline. Blocking out noise, staying present, treating each race as its own moment instead of a referendum on legacy. These were races she needed to win. And she delivered. In 2016, winning her 20th World Cup Crystal Globe title, which is the record for both the Women and Men's World Cup. Then came one of the most brutal chapters of her career. During a training run, Lindsey crashes again. This time, completely tearing her LCL and fracturing her tibial plateau 3 separate spots. Same knee again. Early rehab wasn't aggressive. It was survival. Swelling control, pain management, just getting through the day. As bone healing allowed more movement, rehab became extremely precise. Slow, eccentric movements, isometric holds, stabilizer muscles. At this point, every rep mattered. Mentally, this phase was about identity. She leaned heavily on visualization, staying connected to skiing even when she couldn't be on the snow. By the later stages of her career, Lindsey has admitted she was racing in constant pain. This wasn't occasional soreness, this was daily pain management. Her routine revolved around physical therapy, extended warm-ups, compression, icing, and swelling control. Training volume was limited, recovery became just as important as effort. Her discipline here wasn't about pushing harder. It was about knowing when to stop. One of the most overlooked moments of Lindsey Vonn's career came at the 2019 World Championships. By this point, she had already announced her retirement. Her body was worn down. There was nothing left to prove. And in her final downhill race, she came away with the bronze. Standing on a World Championship podium in the final race of your career, after years of surgeries, pains, and comebacks, is a statement. This victory made Vonn, who was 34 at the time, I'm going to use air quotes because I don't think this is old at all, 34, the oldest woman to win a medal at a World Championship and the first to win medals at 6 different World Championships on top of that. Wild, 34 is old, but I guess it depends on your line of work. This wasn't a farewell lap. It was a reminder of just how truly great she was. Once she finally retired, Lindsey underwent a partial knee resurfacing procedure. And this procedure wasn't about extending a career at this point. It was just about preserving quality of life. After the surgery, rehab was slow. It was smarter, it was pressure-free. She focused on relearning movement patterns, rebuilding trust in her joint, and strengthening around the knee instead of pushing through it. And like any good competitor, quietly something shifted. Little by little, she started training again. This time, not with expectations, not with promises, strictly with curiosity. That curiosity eventually turned into something bigger. The idea of returning for the 2026 Winter Olympics. Not to prove anything, but to see what was still possible. Now, having made her first Olympics at the age of 17, she was aiming to compete in her final Winter Olympics at the age of 41. Her longevity and commitment to her sport is one that should be admired and applauded. In the season leading into the Olympics, Lindsey Vonn proved her comeback wasn't symbolic, it was real. Returning to the World Cup after years of surgeries and rehab, she didn't just start races, she competed. She battled through pain, limited training volume, and constant body management to put herself back on the same courses she once dominated, measuring herself against the best in the world again. The results weren't always podiums, but they didn't need to be. What mattered was that she showed she could still race at the highest level, earn her place back in the Olympic conversation, and validate that the long rebuild, physical, mental, and emotional, had a meaning long before the games ever began. I believe in her final year leading up to the Olympics, she was, right before the Olympics, she was top 5 in the World Cup standing. So, I mean, given the competition, given her age, not that I think 41's old, I'm 42, but in the sport, I guess that is older. She was still competing at the highest level. Now, unfortunately, on January 30th of 2026, she suffered yet another ACL tear in a race in Crans, Montana, Switzerland, just before the Winter Olympics got underway. However, as is Lindsey Vonn's MO, she committed to and fully expected to race when the games got underway on February 8th. She evaluated, she adjusted, and she continued within the limits. That's not recklessness. That's a lifetime of understanding exactly who you are and what discipline really means. And the truth is, even after everything, even after the surgeries, the rehab, the doubt, and the courage it took just to stand back in the start gate, Lindsey Vonn didn't get the storybook ending everyone hopes for. At the 2026 Winter Olympics, she completed the comeback that so many people thought was impossible. But unfortunately, a crash on her first run resulted in her being airlifted off the mountain with a broken leg that ended her Olympic run and took away that fairy tale finish we all hoped for. I'm a Canadian and I was still pulling for her. I really, really wanted to see her do it. And as hard as that is to accept, it doesn't take anything away from what she proved. Because the victory wasn't the result. It was the return. It was the willingness to try again when she didn't know anyone, anything. Not every great story ends with a medal, but some end with something more honest. A reminder that discipline isn't about how it looks at the end, it's about having the courage to show up at all. And that's the discipline of greatness. If this episode resonated with you, if Lindsey Vonn's story made you think differently about discipline, resilience, or what it really takes to keep showing up, I'd really appreciate you supporting the show. Wherever you listen to this podcast, make sure you follow or subscribe. And if you're able to leave a rating or review, it helps this show reach more people who care about growth, competition, and becoming better every single day. And remember, greatness isn't built in moments. It's built in habits. It's built in the work you do when no one's watching. And it's built in choosing discipline over excuses. Thank you all very much for listening. And I look forward to seeing you next episode.